Okay, so now that we've gathered our equipment, we're going to make sure that our expiration dates are okay and that our packaging is nice and intact and everything is still sterile. So this is our tubing pack. You can see that the expiration is 9/19, we're good there. And the package isn't pierced. A little scrape there, but nothing's open. CDI calibrator, expired, not expired. Reservoir, cardiotomy, 121, we're good there. This is our cardioplegia pack, 11/19. All the packaging is nice and intact. Our super sucker pack, our second sucker pack, 120, we're good. A second cardiotomy, 321. And our smoke filter, fused by 318, so we're good. So we like to set up in a sterile environment, so we'll don our mask and then we'll also wash our hands. I've already washed my hands in soap and water this morning, so for me, just some alcohol is sufficient. I'll get my CDI calibration started. So bring this over. Get it plugged in. We're going to calibrate to our arterial blood gases, hematocrit and saturation. Move over to calibration. Make sure the numbers match, 722B and 722B. Looks good. So we just kind of follow directions as it lays out on the screen. Take our CDI cuvette and the arterial monitor. This clicks into place. You can hear a nice click. Loosen the top. Take the blue cap off the bottom. And we'll go ahead and plug it into the calibrator and get that started. My cardiotomy reservoir in the shoulder. He kind of orients the outlet to the side towards the pump. You'll see why later. Remove the yellow caps. Straighten out the manifold as we would see fit. Kind of organize the tubing on the top of the cardiotomy as we'll use. We have a standard setup that we like to do, so this kind of gets moved over to the back left instead of being in the front right. Alright, so everything's in place and kind of oriented the way I want it, so we'll move on. We do record our lot numbers for our case, so I typically take the sticker, which is the tubing pack number, and just stick it right on. Cardioplegia pack. Just throw away. You know, your first one should always be away from you. The last one should be towards you. I did that wrong earlier.
That's alright.
This is our quick prime, so our retrograde autologous prime bag or our antegrade autologous prime bag. So I'll hang that up. Kind of orient the tubing as it would lay naturally so it doesn't kink and lay it down. We kind of interlace it like so, and it gets plugged into the back third port on the cardiotomy. I do clamp this outlet initially as to prevent a whole bunch of air from building up into the wrap bag when I prime it. This then gets plugged into the cardioplegia outlet on your oxygenator. We like 2 barbs for our connections. So push it on there good, don't be shy. Make sure you tighten your connections too. Next in our bag is a vacuum kit. It comes with a few extra pieces of hardware for people that like to Velcro their little fluid collection canister. You can Velcro it to your reservoir. This would be if you want to upsize your smaller cardiotomy to a 1/2-inch tubing, which we're not going to need to do here. And then just a couple extra stubs in case you lose a connector or lose a cap. So we'll save those. And we'll attach the vacuum kit. I like to orient this kind of back away from my workspace. Again, make sure your connections are nice and tight. And then this kind of gets laid and plugged into our vacuum set. Next in our pack is our table pack for the OR. So we'll just go ahead and save this for later, and when we bring our supplies down to the room, they will get that. Dividers, which separate different pieces of our circuit. This is our quick prime line / bailout shunt, as I like to call it. It's our only shunt that appears after the integrated oxygenator / arterial filter, so it's used to remove any air that might make it past our oxygenator. It goes where it says, quick prime line to quick prime connection. I orient the shunt this way where our arterial line will stand. I kind of just hang this up like so. Next we have our ultra filter. We do run one in all of our cases, so we will set one up ahead of time. Red end is kind of arterial, I kind of like to see it, so going into our filter, red. And then blue is our outlet. This stopcock attaches to this small piece of tubing off of our cardioplegia Y. I like to save my caps for later. Make sure when you take those you don't contaminate your connections. And again, make sure your connections are nice and tight. Always make sure after setting this up to clamp this right away, otherwise you'll end up with some prime on the floor once you prime your circuit. And we'll leave that there for now. We have a couple extra lines here. This will be a shunt that we use off of our cardioplegia, so I'll set this aside. This is an extra line that we need in case we can infuse blood after we come off bypass, either over to cell saver or into the patient. And then a couple extra stopcocks that we have, and I'll end up putting those on. One of the stopcocks that we have goes on the top of our reservoir, our venous inlet connection. One of our most important lines, the oxygen or gas connection to the oxygenator. So we'll go ahead and hook that up. It's the only piece of green tubing we have on here, so safety. And I just kind of interlace that through. That way if it gets pulled, it shouldn't come out of either connection. Okay. Moving on, just through our table pack, we have our pressure transducer line, and this is a line that we measure off of our cardioplegia Y, the same place where our ultrafilter connects. So that third port that hasn't been used yet is where we'll connect that. I don't save my non-vented caps, so I'm not worried about contaminating those. I'll go ahead and just hang that up for later. When you run vacuum, you should always measure your negative pressure. We use vacuum, I'd say, in almost 99% of our cases for our surgeons. So we measure off of our venous inlet instead of off the top of the venous reservoir. It gives you a true measure of what your venous pressure is. So that gets plugged into our venous inlet on our reservoir. And then we will plug that into our venous transducer, which is over by our other transducers for both cardioplegia and arterial line. We then have our boot for our arterial pump head. We have lines here. We kind of have like a tapered tubing, 3/8 to 1/2 inch. These lines are kind of to tell you where the 1/2 inch tubing is, so you can place it correctly in your lower pump head. Get a good idea of kind of the occlusion of your pump just by giving a turn. So inlet to the venous reservoir. Two barbs, please. And then we have the outlet of the arterial pump head, which goes into the inlet of the oxygenator. At this time, our CDI calibration should be completed. So we'll go ahead and grab our cuvette and bring it over to our holder. So the next piece in our tubing pack that came was a little small 1/8 inch tubing line. This is to connect our CDI to our manifold, so we can run samples. So this little filter comes off. And that's where our tubing connects. Again, we'll save. And then this part gets connected to our arterial end of the manifold. Be careful not to contaminate this end, as this will move to the top of our CDI, or to the inlet of the CDI. So right up here. When we have our sampling, our CDI will measure off of our oxygenator. So this connection here gets moved down to our outlet of our oxygenator. So the pigtail that comes off that outlet. Moving on, we usually tie band our emergency pumps, but if you're setting up for your own case, typically if you make your connections, you feel they're tight enough, we don't end up tightening or tie banding our connections. This is the remainder of our tubing pack. We actually hand up to the table before our case, so it all comes together for us, which is kind of nice and convenient. So we'll just need one of my clamps here. And this gets situated in one of our clamps here. So we have our suckers and vents, our venous line, arterial line, and our CO2 blower. And I will just drape these lines. Make sure they don't end up on the floor, and kind of just leave them there. I set these up later. In a hurry, it's always order of importance. You'll probably want to set up your AV loop first and get that primed. But since we have plenty of time, I'm just going to go ahead and set up my suckers and my vents first. So we have quite a few options for our surgeons here at Mayo Clinic. We run typically more than one piece of tubing through each raceway, all except for our aortic movement. So we'll go ahead and put yellow and white, those are both of our suckers, through the same roller head. And we do have a nice convenient holder for all those. So yellow and white. Then orange, which is our LV vent, and then blue, which is our aortic root vent. Just kind of place these over here for now, and I'll deal with those afterwards. So here's orange. And then blue. And I'll hang those up to make sure those don't end up on the floor either. So in our Verilog system, we have the blue connections for these, which is typical because we run two pieces of tubing through each raceway. Just go ahead and load those in. Then we'll take the outlets and I'll drape these underneath, and these two will connect right beside our large recirculation line to the front two connections on the left side of the cardiotomy reservoir. All right. In our data supplies, we also brought in a second cardiotomy. A lot of our surgeons prefer a vacuum source for their suction rather than our roller heads, so we set this up for them. Also, in our more complex cases, more suckers help them see. So a lot of our surgeons prefer having more sources of blood collection. So we set this up additionally for them. This came attached to the side here. The cap will go on the outlet. And then this will adapt to a 1/4 inch connection so we can run it through with our LV vent. We have a smoke filter which we use. Just a preference, but When this comes out, you can see it has a flow direction arrow. Make sure you check which way when you're connecting it. I typically just remove the tubing because I don't like my smoke filter in front of some of my pressure monitoring, so I move it back over here. And then save that for later. This is part of the second sucker pack we talked about for our super sucker as it's called. Comes with a couple pieces of tubing. These are longer than they need to be, but you can trim them. This will be to our vacuum source, so this will plug into our smoke filter, and then also our second vacuum connection, so we can control the amount of suction that gets taken. So plugged into the smoke filter, and then I'll drape it over to the vacuum source. You can see it's much longer than it needs to be, so I'll just trim that later. Second piece of line, you can see comes with a 1/4-inch connector, and that connects down to the outlet of the cardiotomy reservoir. We then have our yellow and our orange and our blue. I try not to get things too tangled up, and I kind of messed up there, so just straighten all my lines out. And now we'll put the the orange and the green, which is our super sucker line, through our fourth pump in our raceway. I'll remove the red. Insert in our Verilok system for a blue to accommodate 2 pieces of tubing. Okay. I know it kind of looks like jumbled spaghetti, but it'll be a nice pretty pump when it's finished. So you can see those two. I line them up nicely. I make sure that they don't overlap or get twisted in the raceway, as this will cause your pump to fail. Orient them along the edge of the raceway. And then take the tubings and bring them back over to the cardiotomy. You can see there's one more spot we haven't used, and that'll be for our outlet root vent. Take the last piece and plug it into our cardiotomy. Okay, so we have all of our sucker lines and vents hooked up. I do that first when I have plenty of time to set up, because it allows me to organize all of my lines nicely. I'll then take my arterial line and put it over the sucker lines and behind the bracket, or ahead of the bracket depending upon your perspective, of our oxygenator holder or cardiotomy reservoir holder. Our CO2 line gets plugged into our CO2 connector for table sufflation. And then of course the venous line to the venous inlet. Not too far because we're going to remove the prime filter. So I didn't yet plug in our arterial line. I'll do that after this. But this is our bailout shunt, as I like to call it, our shunt after our integrated oxygenator. And that goes to this lure port connector on our arterial line. And then we'll take the time to plug in our arterial line off the arterial outlet of the oxygenator. Alright. So what's we got left? We have just our cardiopulmonary to set up, which will be from this connection. And this was the top of our hemoconcentrator, which I forgot to connect before. Cardiopulmonary pack. Since we've set everything else up, spin that around. Our order of pumps is kind of unusual. Ours is actually in the middle. So we go arterial, suckers, cardioplegia, LV vent, super sucker, and aortic root vent. So we'll open that up, get everything out. This is the pack for the table, the sterile portion. Grab it all, pull it out. I like to take all the caps off now. And get that out of the way. I saved the cover because I put my tubing pack sticker there, which will record, and also the lot number for our cardioplegia. We record both those, so I'll save that sheet. Okay, so Medtronic myotherm, we have our holder right here. I'll pop that in. I like to place my delivery line right away. So I'll just pop that in there. And this is the bubble detector. We have our connections nice and tight. Our pressure transducer comes off the top. And I'll plug that into the connector for the pressure transducer.
Okay.
I'm over pressurization line, so I run this behind. Other people may have other preferences. I'll then load this into the raceway. Now you can see we run the ratio here. Of different size tubing, so 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch tubing for our either 1:4 Del Nido or 4:1 Buckberg cardioplegia. So I pop that in like so. The big one goes on the bottom, the 1/8 inch line rests on top. And then I'll load it actually backwards. Give it a couple turns, make sure the tubing is oriented well, which it looks like it is. This will come off to our cardioplegia port down by our arterial line. Now I specifically hang that over our sucker lines so we can change our orientation of our clamps if we need to while we're on bypass to either giving all blood or our desired ratio of cardioplegia, either 4:1 or 1:4. I also make sure to clamp my lines as to when I start to prime, they don't leak anywhere from the pressure of the arterial pump head. We also have our recirculation line, which we put on here, and this comes off of the pressure transducer bulb, and this is so we can recirculate through our cardioplegia system. And then I also hang that behind with my overpressurization line. So just a few more connections to make. As I walk around, we have our cardioplegia line, which will connect to our cardioplegia line off of our cardioplegia connector, which is a 1/4 inch stub, will connect to our Y off the cardioplegia outlet from our oxygenator. And we push that on there. Try to go for the 2 barbs. It's a tough connection to make. Then we have our last 2 connections, which is our recirculation line and our overpressurization line. Our cardioplegia. And those will go onto our 2 ports here on top of our cardiotomy. 1 and then 2. Now that fulfills all of our circuit connections we make. Next we have to connect like our ancillary devices, like our temperature management and our safety level detector. I set these up last so they don't interfere with all of your other connections or make them not sterile because they're kind of flimsy and tend to get in the way. Or just kind of drag them through in places where you'll tend not to interfere with your practice. So obviously on the venous inlet, so you can measure patient temperature coming back to you, and you want to measure your arterial outlet temperature in case you have to cool or circ arrest or warm or things like that. And lastly, our safety monitor for our level. You can see the reservoir comes with a marker where it will run safely to. Ours is 150, so we have the level and it goes right on the 150 mark. And there we go.